From K2 News, this is Your Voice, Your Vote, Congressional District 5 debate.
A tight race full of drama in the contest for Oregon Congressional District 5. It is a race closely watched on the national level. The 7-term incumbent, Democrat Kurt Schrader, was knocked out in the primary election, the first time that's happened in Oregon since 1980. District 5 boundaries are significantly redrawn and stretch from Clackamas County over the Cascades and includes the city of Bend, bringing in a new demographic of voters. Now, 2 candidates are vying for the coveted open seat. Republican Lori Chavez-DeRemer, a businesswoman and former mayor of Happy Valley, versus Democrat Jamie McLeod-Skinner, a small business owner and regional emergency coordinator. Tonight, they square off on K2 to win your vote to be one of 6 congressional representatives for Oregon. The Oregon Congressional District 5 debate starts now. Thank you for joining us for K2's Your Voice, Your Vote debate. I'm Deborah Knapp. In a matter of weeks, voters will pick the next congressional representative for District 5. You've likely seen the ads in what has become a political battlefield. The nation remains seemingly polarized on topics like crime, abortion, and the economy. But tonight, we'll hear from the candidates themselves and what solutions they have to offer. So the candidates tonight: Lori Chavez-DeRemer, who lives in Happy Valley, where she served as mayor for 8 years. She won Oregon's Republican primary by almost 43%. And Democrat Jamie McLeod-Skinner lives in Central Oregon. She defeated incumbent Kurt Schrader in the newly redrawn 5th district in the May primary. I want to bring in my colleague Steve Dunn at the live desk, and he'll be bringing us some of your questions to the candidates tonight. But first, he joins us to explain the rules for the debate. Steve?
Yeah, Deb, the candidates have agreed to these rules. We have a team that will be working to fact check and time each response. So here's how things will work tonight. Each candidate will be given 1 minute to respond to each question. The first candidate to answer a question will then have 30 seconds for rebuttal if they choose. Throughout the debate, each candidate will only be able to give a rebuttal 3 times. If we ask for a clarification from a candidate, the timer will be reset. And once again, later on in this debate tonight, I'll also be bringing some of your questions to the candidates via video. For now, Deb, back to you.
Okay, Steve, thank you. About a half an hour ago, we flipped a coin to decide who would respond first. Lori Chavez-DeRemer won that coin toss and will answer our first question tonight. And we begin with the economy. So people are struggling to pay for necessities like groceries right now. If you become a U.S. representative, will you support relief like the stimulus checks that were sent out during the COVID pandemic to help for those necessities?
You know, I spent a lot of time addressing this issue as mayor, recognizing that small businesses struggle, recognizing that families struggle. When COVID hit, businesses were having a hard time deciding whether or not they would be able to keep their doors open, and employees didn't know what to do. When we employ about 150 employees in our business, frontline workers, nurses, doctors, providers. We were able to we furloughed them and were able to keep them employed. So when we came back online, that was an important thing to keep our providers there on the front lines to protect the health care of all Oregonians. It was necessary, and we were proud to keep them employed. They're our family members.
Okay, Jamie, your response.
Well, this is a really tough time for Oregon's working families. Costs are up, the cost of living is up, and wages have not kept up. I'm actually very surprised by the response I heard, because my opponent has been bad-mouthing the stimulus and support. When I served in the city of Talent, handing out those small stimulus checks were the difference between keeping business open or businesses closing their doors. So I think with regards to the economy, there are immediate steps we need to take, short-term steps like lowering prescription drug costs. There's other immediate steps we can take, and then long-term investments as well, building things here again, addressing supply chain issues. Also making sure that working families their needs are being met and supported. Healthcare costs are up. There's a whole slew of issues that need to be addressed that help address where our economy's at and help us move forward. But again, really surprised because I've heard only attacks from my opponent on this one. In her business, of course, got over $1 million in stimulus funding they're not going to have to pay back while she and her spouse were building a multi-million-dollar home in Arizona.
I want to remind our candidates you have 3 options for rebuttal. Lori, would you like to take your rebuttal at this point?
Sure, I would. You know, it was important to send 150 employees of nurse practitioners, physicians to stay on the front line and make sure that we could provide that health care that was needed. Over $1 million that went directly to those employees to keep them employed so they could pay their bills for those same struggling families. My daughter went to ASU. I was always proud to visit her there, get out of the sun. You know, sometimes the clouds here in Oregon. Arizona is a beautiful place to visit, but I'll tell you, my home is right here, where my business is and my family.
Okay, we need to go on to our next question, which I will direct to you, Jamie. Tonight, we get a lot of emails from our viewers about rising gas prices. While they had been dropping in Oregon, we just saw a big hike in gas prices. So what are your proposals to reduce the cost of gas?
Well, in the short term, what we can do is tap into some of those reserves. These are some of the steps that have been taken. But as we do that, we also need to be investing long term in a 21st century clean energy and renewable energy grid. We need to do that without leaving working families behind. We need to provide the resources so that we have a stable grid that is a clean energy grid with redundant systems to make sure we can utilize some of the things like electric vehicles, although we need more R&D to use that in large equipment like trucking and in some of our ag equipment. But in the short term, we're taking some steps now to make sure that reserves are open, but that needs to be done in partnership with long-term commitments to making sure we're addressing climate issues so that we can both address immediate costs and also at the same time address the long-term impacts of fossil fuels.
Lori, your response.
We've seen gas prices rise consistently over the last 2 years with the inflation at its highest in 40 years. While it maybe have got, $4 a gallon, and we're going to say that that's okay, it was just a little over $2 in the last administration. We saw a little bit of a downtick this summer, but guess what? It's going right back up, and we're feeling that at the pump. Over $100 to fill up a tank is very distressing to so many working families. I had a visit with a young woman the other day who told me, I'm having to choose between filling up my gas to go to work or choosing between one meal a day. That's how much working families are struggling. We've tapped into those oil reserves and the gas prices are still going up. We're going to have to drill here in America. We need to make sure that those leases and permitting is a quicker turnaround time. We can address different types of energy sectors, and we have to make sure that we're energy independent in this country.
Would you like to use one of your rebuttals tonight, Jamie? Okay.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our next question this evening. Lori, this is directed to you. Congress passed President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act this summer. There is debate over how effective it will be. Given that inflation will be here for a while, what action should Congress take to reduce inflation when you get there?
We can call the Inflation Reduction Act whatever we want, but I think that Oregonians, they have to believe their own eyes, and inflation is going up. We're seeing it in our grocery prices. We're seeing it at the gas pump. We're seeing it with health care. We're seeing it across the board, and it's addressing every sector. When we pass and infuse more money into the economy that's chasing too few goods after we've just come off of the pandemic, when the supply chain is short, inflation's going to rise. We're not going to see that money, which the lion's share is to address just the Green New Deal. When most Oregonians can barely put food on their tables and gas in their tank, they're going to say enough's enough, and it's going to hurt the poorest of families. Black and brown families will struggle. It is incumbent upon us as leaders to invest in Oregon and make sure that there are enough jobs to put food on the table and gas in their cars.
Jamie, your response.
Yeah, we knew post-COVID that this was going to be an issue. We've got supply chain issues. We've got the war in Ukraine that is impacting supply chain. So there are, again, short-term and long-term solutions. We also have to stop things like price gouging. We've seen that with prescription drug prices. I actually don't take money from healthcare industry because of the need to hold them accountable. But also, the Inflation Reduction Act, it addressed everything from helping to invest in some of the infrastructure projects we need to work on. It helped to address the climate crisis that we're dealing with. It's investing in long-term solutions and short-term solutions. Now, additional steps need to be taken. We need additional investments in helping working families get back on their feet. But some of the steps that were taken were really key. The other costs, because this is all about cost of living going up, it's housing costs, it's prescription drug costs, it's child care costs. All of these things are helping are creating barrier for working families.
Lori, would you like to use another rebuttal? Okay, let's move on to our next question. Jamie, this is to you. The Federal Reserve increased its key interest rate for the third time in a row to get ahead of inflation, which in turn impacts interest rates. Do you support what the Federal Reserve is doing to decrease inflation? Why or why not?
Well, one of the challenges here is to make sure that what we're facing now is not what we're facing in the 1970s. So yes, families are hurting, and yes, we need to be dealing with the crisis and managing costs. But at the same time, we need to be making some investments in helping to bring costs down. You know, one example that it's dealing with is housing costs. And there are short and long-term solutions on this as well. But we have corporations who are going in and buying housing so people are forced into rentals and then cranking up the prices. That's a real challenge for working families. It's one of the many challenges that working families are facing right now. In terms of what the federal government has done, they're using some techniques they've used before, but you can't overplay your hand on that. We also need to balance, address supply chain issues and address the free market to make sure that businesses are able to engage. We don't want the cost of borrowing money to go too high. I think their initial steps were good, but we also have to watch this closely to make sure the impacts do not backlash.
Lori, your response.
This is just simply a correction, an overcorrection of failed policies. What we've seen from the Biden administration is infusing too much money into the economy, chasing too few goods. Inflation has risen. I'm 54 years old. This is the highest I have seen inflation in my lifetime. I can tell you this, housing is going to be the #1 thing that people will spend most of their money on, and they're not going to be able to afford it any longer. You know, as mayor, I spent a lot of time making sure that we could have affordable housing. We have to make sure that we deal with the land use issues in this state as well. When the land costs are high because there's too few areas to build, we come across this issue. What are our young families going to do? What are our 30 and 35-year-olds, what are our 20-year-olds going to do? They're paying for college, they're paying for gas, they're paying for groceries, and now they can't afford a place to live. We're going to see what we saw in 2007 and 2008, and we should be fearful of that. We have to make sure, as a country, that we believe in the free market. Thank you.
Jamie, you have an option if you'd like to use one of your rebuttals.
I assume we're going to be talking about housing later, so I'll leave that.
Well, I'll leave it up to you from now on out to let us know when you're ready to use a rebuttal. Let's move on to public safety. And Lori, this is directed towards you first for this question. What will it take to reduce gun violence in the country?
The mental health crisis that has affected and afflicted our communities has been tragic. We're seeing not only property crimes go up, we're seeing violent crimes, we're seeing homicides jump. The national average is up 30%. We just saw this tragedy happened in this district in Bend. How tragic for those parents and those families to have to deal with that. You know, everyday Oregonians, when they're walking to the grocery store, shouldn't have to worry if they're going to be gunned down. You know, my husband and I own and operate mental health clinics for this very reason. We have to make sure that we have wraparound services for these young men and women, people who are distressed with their mental health issues, that we can make sure that we're addressing that at all costs. You know, this is a tragedy. We're seeing it far too often on the streets. Portland has been afflicted. Other major cities that are run by blue governors has been afflicted, and we need to stop it.
Jamie, your response.
You know, I was recently in the Bend Safeway where the shooting took place. Well, actually, my opponent was off on a publicity stunt at the border, but I was asked this specific question. And what we need to do is take gun violence seriously. Yes, there are other measures as well, but we need to do the basic things of making sure there's safe storage, making sure that we're closing loopholes on background checks, making sure that we're banning ghost guns, and addressing weapons of war. There's multiple steps we can take in addressing assault weapons. But here's the thing, this is not a gun owner versus non-gun owner issue. My dad put food on our table. My father-in-law grew up hunting in Eastern Oregon. And my mom is a teacher. Every time there's a shooting, she goes through her own PTSD because she actually was in the classrooms in those drills and looked those kids in the eye when they asked her would she stand between them and a shooter, and she said yes. This is about people who respect responsible gun ownership and those who don't care about the safety of our communities. That's what's at issue here.
Speaking of gun control, would you like to use one
Yes,
of your rebuttals?
please.
Okay.
I would. Criminals, have to be accountable. We have to make sure that law-abiding citizens and criminals cannot be handled in the same manner. But the publicity stunt, I want to make sure to address that. It is not a publicity stunt when we're talking about men and women and young children dying in the Rio Grande River. That is very important to America as a whole. If Oregon wants to shut their eyes to it, like my opponent, and the Biden-Pelosi has not gone down to that border, it is affecting us with the fentanyl crisis right here in Oregon. This is an America's problem.
Okay, let's move on to our next question.
I'd actually like to address that as well, because while I was in Central Oregon and we were dealing with the crisis and helping communities.
I apologize, we have to stop. We don't have an opportunity to do a second rebuttal. Okay. We can bring that up at a later time. Our next question on gun control, where do you stand? Do you support additional laws, and if so, what?
So it's about gun safety. It's not about gun control. The debate here is about responsible gun ownership. Those who support responsible gun owners, and the majority of responsible gun owners, believe that there's additional steps that we need to take. I outlined them briefly just in my previous comments, but this is between responsible gun ownership and those who are not taking our community safety seriously. So again, I was, after the shooting in Bend, my wife and I attended the vigil. We were talking to folks locally, helping to support those who are addressing or dealing with this fear. And I serve on an ESD board, and I was talking to superintendents and teachers were afraid to go back in the classroom. Parents were afraid to send their kids to school. Children were afraid to go back. I sat and spoke to a young person, a teenager, who was just staring straight ahead and couldn't even articulate her fear. We must address these issues so that our communities are safe. Looking the other way is not a solution and is not leadership.
Lori, your response.
Again, categorizing one-size-fits-all law-abiding citizens, we have to make sure that our schools are safe. We have to make sure that we can secure them. We see that, for instance, on our military bases where we have one point of entry. We want to make sure that our most prized possessions are. My greatest job was being a mom and making sure that my kids were protected and my community was safe. And as a mayor, we have to make sure that we take that into consideration. And that's going to take law enforcement. We have moved to defund the police over and over and over again, where we don't recognize who should and who shouldn't have a gun. My opponent, she marched for the defund the police movement. She is supported by the defund the police movement. We've seen it over and over again. We have to give the resources to our law enforcement officers to protect our communities. We have to do that not only in our local communities, we have to do it throughout our major cities, and we have to do it through the state of Oregon and across this country.
I would like to use a rebuttal on this because my opponent needs to develop a better relationship with the truth. I mean, the fact of the matter is I'm the only one in this race who has a long and consistent history, when I was a council member, when I was a city manager, of making sure we fully funded and increased funding for police and accountability and training and wellness for police officers. I've been through a Citizen Police Academy. It's a tough job. I'm actually supported by the former chief of police of Bend and other folks who work in search and rescue because they trust me on this issue.
Our next question tonight goes to Lori. Oregon is dealing with a fentanyl crisis. What should be Congress's role in stopping the illegal trafficking of drugs in Oregon and around the country?
Again, it comes back to law and order and protecting not only in the immediate focus, but securing that southern border. It's not about closing the border. This is, my heritage is the Hispanic heritage. I'm very proud of that. But securing the border, knowing what the process is, we don't have a clue who's coming in and out of this country. And alongside of that is coming the fentanyl, the rainbow fentanyl that we're seeing. They're giving warnings to our families to protect your kids during this Halloween that's coming up because it will kill our children. I fully funded the police in Happy Valley. I know my opponent wants to continue to throw these accusations at me. 4 months being a city manager before you were fired, Jamie, isn't a leadership. So I don't want to go back and forth on this. Let's address what the issues of Oregon is concerned about, and that is the safety of our families and our communities.
Jamie, your response.
Yeah, so the borders are not open, and no one supports the opening of borders. That's ridiculous. When it comes to public safety, what our police officers are telling us, if you actually go out and talk to them, and our rural sheriffs is that they want more help and support on mental health services. This is part of the challenge. We absolutely need to crack down on fentanyl and address that. It's a safety issue. But actually, when you were in a leadership role in Happy Valley, the police department was almost completely defunded because of a failed levy. It cost taxpayer money to get another levy on the ballot and to actually have that go forward. But under your watch, the Happy Valley Police Department was almost defunded. And I didn't participate in the claims of attending the rally in Portland.
Okay, our next question tonight. This goes to Jamie. For the record, where do you stand on defunding police?
I am opposed to defunding police. It's a ridiculous claim that's been made. I mean, this is more DC talking points that my opponent's using. Again, I'm the only one here who has a consistent and long track record as a council member, as a city manager, of increasing funding for police, of providing increased funding for training, for accountability, because that's also important, and for officer wellness. When I went to Talent as the interim city manager, when I got there, the city did not have 24/7 coverage. When I left, they did. Again, the former chief of police of Bend is supporting me in this race because he knows I'm the one who can actually get things done and supportive of our public safety officers. These are ridiculous claims. It's more DC talking points. And again, my opponent would have, under her failed leadership, would have defunded the Happy Valley Police Department because of a failed levy.
Lori, your answer.
It was one of my top priorities always as mayor of Happy Valley. Over and over again, citizens of Happy Valley wanted to make sure that they had full funding of the police. Every year when we do this five-year police levy, it's important to recognize that. And I put in the shoe leather. I knocked doors every single day. And when they understood how important it was to refund the police, it passed by 80%. You know, it takes dedication and commitment as a mayor to work every day. We don't get to run and hide. We're at the grocery stores, we're in the parks, we're at the schools. People want to know that you care about them. And I was voted 4 times and elected, twice as a city councilor and twice as mayor. And I was very proud to serve there. You know, we have to give the resources here, not only in our sister city of Portland, because again, you cannot ask us to not believe our own eyes. The funding of police has not happened. It hasn't happened under Ted Wheeler, Governor Kate Brown, or Biden and Pelosi, and it certainly won't happen under Jamie McLeod-Skinner.
We want to move on to our next topic tonight, which is access to abortion, and we will start with you tonight, Lori. Unlike other states, abortions are legal in Oregon in all stages of pregnancy. Oregon does not have the limitations found in other states. Do you agree with Oregon's current law? Why or why not?
That was codified in law in 2017. You know, this is one of the topics that they think Republicans don't want to talk about. I am a woman. I've raised 2 beautiful young girls, and to shy away from this issue is nonsense. We have to make sure that we listen. You know, 14 months we've been on the campaign trail. You know, our voice isn't the only one that matters. We know that a majority of Oregonians and a majority of Americans want access to reasonable, common sense approach. My opponent, she will tell you that she is for up to the last minute abortion, on demand, and fully taxpayer funded. That's extreme. That doesn't fall in line with mainstream. I fall in line with mainstream. She does not.
Jamie, your answer?
Yeah, it's notable that she didn't answer your question. So my opponent would ban abortion before a woman even knows she's pregnant, period. She is trying to take away our reproductive rights. I will protect them. She celebrated the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I would codify Roe. You know, I fundamentally believe that government has no right telling us what to do with our bodies, how to respond to medical emergencies, and then also when to start a family. That is not the right of the government. Government needs to know when to help out and when to get out of the way. Get out of the way in terms of our choices and decision about our reproductive rights. My opponent, again, would, and there's no clear distinction and difference on this on this issue, or in this race and on this issue. My opponent would vote to ban abortion before a woman even knows she's pregnant, and she's endorsed and supported by organizations that would have an all-out ban. That's how she got through the primary, was that commitment. Her website's since been scrubbed, but that is the commitment she's made.
For our next question tonight, we wanted.
I would like to.
You'd like to use your third rebuttal?
Sure. Okay. You know, I've never been pro-choice enough for the left, and never been pro-life enough for the right. This issue is an important one, and I'll make it clear today, I've never changed my position. I stand with mainstream, where a majority of Oregonians and Americans want access to a reasonable approach. My opponent, she wants abortion to the very last day, fully taxpayer funded.
At this point, we need to move on to our next question, which we will turn to my colleague Steve Dunn, who's at the live desk with a viewer question. Steve?
And Deb, turning to the questions you want answered tonight, we want to make sure to hear from the people of Bend, which is one of the areas added to District 5 after the map was redrawn. And that's where we met Tara, who has this question on abortion.
My name's Tara, and I live in Bend, Oregon, and I'd like to know, as a new congressperson, what you're going to do to ensure that people of all genders here in Oregon continue to have access to reproductive health care.
Jamie, you have the first option to respond.
Yeah, sure. So I believe that government should be funding access to physical and mental health care. Reproductive health care is part of health care. That's critically important. And making sure that government gets out of the way, of our reproductive rights and our fundamental personal freedoms. That's what this is about, because with the Supreme Court started with taking away our right to our reproductive rights, they've also made it very clear that other rights are on the way. So codifying these rights, I would codify Roe v. Wade into law. My opponent celebrated the overturning of it. She has said clearly she would ban abortion before a woman even knows she's pregnant. That's critically important. And with regard to the attack on just as a personal story, and I've received permission from my wife to tell the story, she was having a miscarriage. She would have bled out had she not had access to an abortion. These are horrific decisions that families need to struggle with, but under laws that you have supported, she would have died.
Lori?
I'm passionate about this issue.
Lori, it's your time to
Me
answer.
too. Rape, incest, life of the mother, of course, should be protected. Again, I'm a woman. We have to have passion and compassion about our convictions. Again, it is codified here, just like Roe. Oregon is codified here. There are protections for that. And so it's nonsense to say that. You know, women have a right to make their choices when it comes to contraception. They have a right to freedom about who they love and who they choose. That is not on the line here. We're talking about abortion until the very last moment. Fully taxpayer funded, even partial birth abortions. I can't stand by that.
Would you like to use one of your rebuttals?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a clear contrast here. She's equivocating and didn't answer the direct question. So my opponent has made very clear she would ban abortion before a woman knows she's pregnant. That is the standard she has set. Now, the fact of the matter is, what the courts did is put the decision back on states, but she has also said she would vote for a ban in Congress. This issue will be in Congress next year, and this race is one of the ones that will determine whether or not we lose our reproductive rights or we protect them.
Okay, we're moving on to our next topic tonight, which is on climate change. And Lori, we will start with you. Oregon plans to join California when it comes to banning sales of new gas-powered vehicles by the year 2035. Do you support this idea on a federal level?
No. I don't support it on a federal level. When we have only one choice when we're addressing this idea of climate change, because you know the climate's been changing for thousands of years, we have to come up with innovative new sectors on how to address how we protect our most natural resources and protect this country. You know, when we, like I said, if we don't talk about other sectors of energy, we will not be able to keep up, and we saw that. California did just pass making sure that they want to move forward with all electric vehicles by 2035. It's 2022. They've moved forward, and now they don't have enough electricity to power those cars, and they're asking people, please don't charge them. We have to make sure that we're addressing the private sector. We are not mandating, we're innovating, and we're spending time on research and development. We cannot continue to make our businesses villains. We have to make them our champions, and we have to make sure we support that and protect our most natural resources.
Jamie, your answer.
So climate change presents a clear and present danger to our communities, and we must address it. Specific to your question, the technology is not there yet for some of the sectors, and so the technology has to catch up before that kind of step can be mandated. And that's especially with our trucking industry and our ag industry. But specific to this issue, look, I spent half of last year leading wildfire recovery efforts in a small town in Oregon that lost a third of its homes and businesses to wildfire. it was very personal. It was just down the road from where I finished high school. I actually finished high school in Oregon. And also, you know, I had family on either end of the fire. And it was, a friend of mine lost her home. We must deal with this issue. I worked with the team to make sure we got the resources we needed and begin the rebuilding process. My opponent has offered no leadership on this issue. It is a crisis. Our homes are literally burning down here in Oregon. I've got the experience on the ground solving these problems, and that's why that's the experience I'll bring to Washington.
Our next question tonight: we've seen some of the most active and destructive wildfires in the last 5 years. Does the federal government have an effective wildfire management plan? If your answer is no, what would you change? And this goes to you, Jamie, first.
I'm so excited to this question just for the reason I said. So there are improvements we can make both with emergency preparedness. That's a big step, and the federal government hasn't done enough there yet. And then on emergency response, we need to make sure that we have the resources that come into a community, and then also work with the local manager. And this was my case in Talent, when I work with both state, regional, and federal agencies to make sure we began the rebuilding process. We also need to speed up some of the housing issues. Emergency housing is a critical issue. In the case of Talent, the third of the homes that were burned down, those are mostly seniors on a fixed income and farm workers. And there's a crisis that's still recovering right now. It's actually part of the work I'm doing with the state and helping on emergency response and recovery. The other thing that we need to do is be thinking long term and making the investments like addressing climate issues and that big picture spectrum. And that includes building a 21st century clean energy economy.
Lori, your answer, please.
For sure, in the short term, when these mega fires hit our communities, you know, gosh, really over the last 10, 15 years, we've heard from industry leaders that, you know, we have a lot of ONC land. 60% of our land is managed by either the federal government or the state government. And intermixed with that, checkerboarded throughout, it's private lands as well. We're not getting into those forests in order to thin out the dead wood. We're not, you know, actively managing for a healthy forest and treating them like tree farms. And we've heard over and over and over again about being a protectionist. I know the Democrats and I know my opponent wants to keep us out of those forests for those reasons, but we have to listen to industry leaders, and every single time that we leave it up to our natural resources, up to the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., and they take the one-legged stool of industry leaders out of the conversation, we see these mega fires happening over and over and over again, and enough's enough.
Okay, we're moving on to our next topic tonight, which is homelessness. And Lori, we'll start with you with this question. The issue of homelessness is felt widely in Oregon and around Congressional District 5. What should the role of Congress be when it comes to providing for the houseless?
For sure. We are seeing it, I think a report just came out in Oregon. We're seeing about 15,000 homelessness in the state of Oregon. And over 90% of those are dealing again with drug addiction issues. They're dealing with mental health issues. And we haven't put enough really resources into those wraparound services. We can say on the streets that when somebody is homeless and they're drug addicted and we have a $100 citation with an 800 number that says show up to court, and we hope that you can survive your addiction, it's not enough. We have to be compassionate. These are our brothers and sisters, again, our community members, maybe even family members, and we're watching them die on the streets. You know, we have to make sure that we address all issues of why people are on the streets, creating new jobs, for sure, making sure that there's enough affordable housing, making sure that we address the mental health issues, and certainly addressing the drug addiction problems that we're seeing, because it creeps out into everywhere,
Jamie,
including public safety.
Your turn to answer.
Yeah, you know, so we have an absolute crisis: houselessness, homelessness, and lack of affordable housing, and it's in urban and rural areas. I'm delighted to hear my opponent changing her views on this instead of just criticizing the federal government for the steps that have been taken. But we need to short and long-term solutions. In the short term, we need to get people off the streets, get into emergency housing, and have those wraparound services, addiction services, and then also mental health support. That also ties into the mental health support and that larger issue of healthcare we should also discuss. In long term, we need more affordable housing. I'm actually right now working on an affordable home ownership project, in Oregon that's serving as a pilot project so that people can get out of cycles of generational poverty. What we're seeing is mega corporations stepping in and actually buying up housing stock, forcing people into rental, and then cranking up rental prices. I've actually got experience on this topic, a track record on this topic, and solutions of things we can do in DC.
Our next question, Jamie, this will go towards you. What can Congress do to help cities and states address the mental health crisis that we're seeing in this country that drives some of the homeless crisis?
Yeah, this is a huge issue in many capacities, in many ways. So I believe that we should all have access to physical and mental health. There are ways that we can invest and have lower costs overall, but provide those services. And when it comes to mental health services, whether it's seniors, whether it's folks with disabilities, you talk to police officers, everyone is talking about the need for this commitment to additional services. It's critically important. You know, my opponent actually opposes all government-funded health care. Maybe not realizing that Medicare and Medicaid and the VA healthcare system, which includes mental health services, is part of government-funded healthcare. There are steps that can be partnerships between public and private partnerships to address these issues, but these are things that we must address and must invest in to get people off the street and help address this crisis.
Lori, your answer.
Again, I mentioned earlier, my husband and I own and operate mental health clinics where we serve drug-resistant depression patients. You know, and it's a crisis that's growing, and it's happening across all ages, and we're seeing that where we really can't keep up with the demand. And it's something that we stayed focused on for these reasons, because we know as community leaders, as mayor, this is important to all members of the community, because again, it can afflict, you know, maybe our family members, our community members. But when my opponent talks about mandatory spending, which we know at the congressional level, over 60% is mandatory spending. And when we talk about that, we talk about seniors and disability and Medicare and Medicaid. And how do we pay into those coffers? We know through 2040 it's secure. But what about these 45-year-olds? We want 20-year-olds paying into it. We have to make sure that we create more jobs in this state so that we can pay into those coffers, so we can secure for our seniors and secure for our future that we have Social Security benefits and Medicaid benefits and Medicare benefits that is mandatory spending by the federal government.
Want to go once again to my colleague Steve Dunn, who's at the live desk with another question from a viewer. Steve?
Yeah, returning to the questions you want answered, you folks talked a little bit about this out there, but homelessness is a problem impacting many communities throughout the state right now. We went to West Lynn. That's where we met John. He has this question for the candidates.
Hey, my name is John Hunter. I live in West Lynn, and I feel like one of the biggest challenges for Oregon right now is affordable housing. What would you do to make housing more affordable in Oregon or District?
District 5, of course. Lori, you had the first answer.
You know, I've been endorsed by realtors, I've been endorsed by home builders, because this has really been at their forefront as well. And as mayor, we had to make sure that we had affordable housing. The way we can have affordable housing is expansion of more land where we can build. We certainly have to keep costs down. And how do we do that? Deregulation. We cannot continue to overregulate and overtax the people who are building. Here's another thing, we have to make sure that we have the builders. We have to have a trained workforce to do the building here in Oregon. So there's lots of factors that I've been focused on as mayor, certainly been focused on in working with these other leaders in the community, and how important that is. And when it affects the mental health crisis, we do have to make sure people stay off the streets. Not only are we seeing the full effects with mental health, but we're seeing it affect our crime, and we're seeing it affect our businesses, and they're struggling. They're not sure what to do, but we're seeing door after door of businesses close because they don't know how to address it, and they're compassionate and they care, but they don't have the answers, and they're looking to us as leaders to make sure we fix that.
Your turn.
John, thanks for the question. This is critically important for our communities, and again, we're experiencing in urban and rural areas. You know, we've seen that trickle down doesn't work. We got to try trickle up, and so investing in affordable housing is critically important. So I mentioned with the affordable housing project I'm working on right now, affordable home ownership project. There's also, I've worked on this issue before as a council member as well, using community block grant funds, CDBG funds, in a partnership with a school district and also with an affordable housing developer to develop affordable housing for teachers. We can also be developing affordable housing for first responders. There's all sorts of ways to target this. The point here is that you have federal funding that is targeted, that works in partnership with other sectors. I've done this before. There's ways to do this, but you also need to make sure that you're not just allocating the funds, but you're also targeting them specifically. I've worked as a planner, I've worked as a city manager, and know how to do this type of work. it was also the rebuilding we started in talent utilize these skills and this background.
Our next topic tonight.
Do I have a rebuttal left?
You are out of rebuttals this evening. Our next topic tonight is education, and around the nation, schools have become political battlefields when it comes to culture, war, disagreements over critical race theory, gender identity, and mask mandates. Would you like to see a national oversight about what happens in schools? Jamie, we'll go to you.
No, these are local discussions and local decisions. I think there's opportunities for federal resources. I was horrified that my opponent wants to defund the Department of Education just when these times are the most challenging, rebounding from COVID and getting our schools through this time and helping our kids rebound from the COVID economy. Look, if you're interested in education, do what I did. Run for a school board or an ESD board, an Education Service District board. I serve on an ESD board in Central Oregon. We work in partnership with our families and our communities. It's a very diverse board, politically diverse, but we focus on working together to address the problems that our families and our communities are facing. That's leadership. Using this as a divisive point, and I know, I'll be surprised if she doesn't bring it up today, but I know my opponent is using a divisive point on this to try to tear families apart and create conflict where we need solutions. I'm really proud of my track record of bridging divides, bringing people together to focus on problem solving for our kids and our communities.
Lori, your answer.
We have to think about not forgetting the most important part of our education system, and that's the parents. And that's what we noticed that during COVID, the Band-Aid was really taken off and left behind. It isn't about defunding the Department of Education. We want to make sure that that money flows down to the states. You know, Oregon's 48th in the nation for successful education practices. So it doesn't matter how many boards that you sit on. If we're still, just below the number 50, we're not doing very good and our kids are suffering. We had mandated lockdowns for well over a year. We had school boards locking their doors to parents and attacking them for wondering what's happening. Where's the accountability that happened over the last 2 years that parents did not get their questions answered? And we cannot continue down this road of educating our workforce for the future on a world stage if we leave parents out of the equation.
Our next question tonight is the latest test scores from Oregon. Oregon students show that overall student achievement had dropped dramatically. The results are not unique to Oregon and not surprising given the impact COVID had on schools. So what part, if any, does Congress have in helping student achievement to improve? And Lori, we'll start with you.
And this is exactly what I was referring to. We can't keep lowering the standards and lowering the bar, and that's exactly what the legislature did here in the state of Oregon. When we couldn't reach the scores that we needed for our kids, we decided to lower the bar so they can graduate. That's disappointing for families. We spend a lot of money in the state per child without any success, and now again, post-COVID and this economy, I will tell you, I've talked to many friends in the mental health business. I've talked to speech pathologists. Our kids are not speaking. They're having a hard time getting back into the game, and parents again are still being left out. We need to make sure that the money can follow the child, because parents know best what is best for their kids and their education, and we need to make sure that that voice is not left behind. We need to have a Parents' Bill of Rights, and I will tell you, I will fight for that every single day. Parents want a voice in the classroom.
Jamie?
As the proud product of public schools here in Oregon, high school and in law school, as the daughter of an educator, I know how important it is to invest in our students and make sure, and in our teachers and in our classrooms, to make sure that we're helping our students get ahead. Look, we just came out of a global pandemic. Of course we're struggling. Of course there's challenges. What we need to do, instead of blaming kids and blaming teachers, is help them get back on track. And so defunding the Department of Education is a ridiculous concept when our kids need it the most right now. We need to be helping our students. A lot of the work that we do at our ESD in providing IT services, that was a huge barrier and a huge challenge to a lot of our students. The other thing for educators, it's part of this economic development package. I'm proposing a civilian GI Bill that will help folks who are interested in going into education to get fully funded and then be placed in areas where we need our educators the most. It's modeled on a program we have in Eastern Oregon.
This is an opportunity now to get to know both of you as candidates. You're running on self-proclaimed titles of conservative or progressive. So where do you see yourself on the party spectrum? Start with you, Jamie.
I'm running as an Oregonian. I am endorsed by the I'm nominated by the Democratic Party of Oregon, the Working Families Party of Oregon, and the Independent Party of Oregon. I am supported by working families across our state, from the building trades to teachers to nurses to grocery store clerks. The gentleman who gave his life in the Bend shooting was a grocery store clerk that's part of UFCW. I am supported by working people because I'm showing up and addressing the issues that Oregonians are facing, and helping to create solutions and solve the problems and address the challenges that we're facing. So I'm running as an Oregonian.
Would you say you're progressive?
I would say I'm an Oregonian. I mean, so here's the bottom line, is regardless of party affiliation, we all want to be able to put a roof over our head and food on our table. We want opportunities for our kids. We want health care for our families when they're sick. We don't want our homes to burn down. That's what I am. That's what I'm running on. That's the work I've done, and that's the work I'll do in Congress.
Lori, your answer.
Yeah, a conservative voice who gets things done. You know, a business owner, a mayor, a mom, supported throughout really the state of Oregon by elected leaders, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side. You know, people are frustrated by the government lockdowns. People are frustrated by the overregulation and overtaxation. It's killing our businesses. Families are leaving Oregon. You know, the values of faith, family, freedom, hard work, law and order, integrity, that means something. You know, a good old handshake means something too. You know, I've spent 8 years as mayor making sure that we can address all these issues. There are small businesses, there's minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses that we want to make sure that we can elevate. You know, it's time for the Republican Party for change, and they've opened their arms to that. And I know I'm a Hispanic Republican woman. That's the new face of the Republican Party, and I'm proud of that, because I've worked hard to be exactly where we are today to lead.
I need to interrupt here, and this is an opportunity for you both to ask each other a question. Lori, we'll start with you.
Sure.
You ask the question first. Please keep your questions brief, and then Jamie, you have a minute to respond.
Great. Jamie, we know President Biden has struggled with the economy, really, and more than 50% of Americans have decided that they don't think he's doing very well. Do you believe that Elizabeth Warren would have been a better president?
I believe we need good leadership for these times, and what I'm focused on is bringing that leadership for Oregon families. That's why I'm supported by Republicans and Democrats and independents. That's why I'm nominated by the Independent Party of Oregon and the Democratic Party of Oregon, the Working Families Party. We need leadership now that's going to help us address the challenges that we're facing now. I will give President Biden props for keeping us out of World War III. He's been doing some things that are really helpful. At the same time, I'm running, like I said, as an Oregonian. I'm interested in going and shaking things up and pushing back, because there's some things that Democrats are not doing. One example, banning stock trading for members of Congress. That's a step that we should be taking. Making sure that we're addressing the needs of our working families and not going to the extremism that you've been promoting. It's been a fascinating evening tonight, hearing how you've really backed off on a lot of the views and the things that you've been talking about. But what you have represented and what you've proposed is different from
I need to interrupt at this point, and this is your opportunity now to ask Lori a question. And Lori, you have a minute to respond.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we touched on this earlier when we were talking about health care. Lori, you've said you don't believe that government should be involved in any funding of health care. The fact of the matter is Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA healthcare system are government funded. There are millions of Oregonians who are dependent on those systems. So what is your solution? Are you just going to kick them off? Or what is your solution for actually making sure that their health care is addressed?
I've always been supportive of veterans. I was very proud as mayor to, honor them with a Veterans Memorial. I've been supported by many veterans. My parents are seniors, 78-year-old dad and 76-year-old mom who just retired, and I'm sure worries about, her future as she's still helping to raise some young children in the family. Again, this is mandatory expenses by the federal government that are required to be funded. Again, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. What we have to do is fill those coffers. We want to make sure that we protect our seniors at all costs. We want to make sure that we protect our veterans at all costs. How do we fill those coffers? We create more jobs. As a mayor, I have spent 8 years as a business owner making sure that I could fully fund and employ 150 or more families to do just that. We're missing the boat on this. You want to make it a talking point, I will tell you I have a track record of successful business leadership.
Okay, at the beginning of the debate, we went over the rules. You each had 3 rebuttals. Lori, you've used all of your rebuttals. Jamie, you still have 1 left. This is your last opportunity. Would you like to use it?
Yeah, well, I noticed that you didn't actually talk about how we can provide and where those folks will turn for health care. It's one thing to support veterans. It's another thing to take away the VA system. That is for physical health care. That is for mental health care. Our veterans are dependent on that. They've served our country and we need to serve them. That's the deal. That's the deal they signed up for. So pulling that rug out from under their feet is simply unconscionable. And for our seniors who are dependent on Medicare and Medicaid, what you've just heard is you will lose that under her.
At this point, this brings us to our closing statements from our candidates tonight. You each have 1 minute to give your final statement. Per our rules, since Lori gave the first response, Jamie will give the first closing statement tonight. You have 1 minute.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for this opportunity. Thanks, Lori, for showing up for this conversation. I mean, what you've really heard here tonight is this sense of investing in communities and building community and working together to bridge the divides to get things done. Someone with a track record of getting stuff done on the ground. All of these topics that we talked about, I've talked about different projects I've proposed or different projects I've worked on specifically. I've been quite stunned tonight to hear the whitewashing of a record and a track record of my opponent, but not having answers and not having solutions for the challenges that our working families are facing, not being willing to commit to protecting our right to reproductive rights and also our fundamental personal freedoms. That is critically important to so many Americans, and also the extremism that's been celebrated. My opponent has made an apologist for the January 6th insurrectionists. That is a shameful record.
Okay.
We need better.
At this point, Lori, this is your opportunity for your final closing statement.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody tuning in. This is important. We've been on the trail for 15 months in this campaign, and we've heard from so many of you in the 5th District about what your issues are and what's really hurting your families or what you're concerned with. And I will tell you, we have to make sure that we get this inflation and this economy back on track. We cannot deal with 40-year high inflation. We will not survive. It's unsustainable for business owners. It's unsustainable for our families. I have a proven track record of being a local mayor, elected twice to represent the community, where education was important, where small businesses were important, where our veterans were important. Faith, family, freedom, hard work. I will not get off of that train because that is what everybody is concerned with. We cannot continue down this road of defunding the police. We have to protect our communities. I take offense to the whitewashing terminology, considering I am Hispanic, but I'll let that one slide. And I find it really unfortunate that you use that.
With that, we need to use our last moments to say thank you for everybody for joining us tonight for the special edition for K2 News at 6. I would like to thank both of our candidates for being with us tonight. You can rewatch the full debate on our website. Just go to katu.com and be sure to join us next Tuesday for our gubernatorial debate right here on K2. All 3 candidates for governor will join us to discuss some of the biggest issues facing the state. That's next Tuesday right here on K2 News at 6. We'll see you right back here for K2 News at 11.